The first alien strike never reached the ground. It wasn't intercepted. It wasn't deflected. It simply slowed, as if the universe itself had hesitated. A beam capable of cracking continents crawled through the atmosphere like it was pushing through invisible glass, bleeding energy, weakening, until it finally struck the Pacific Ocean with the force of a dying wave. No explosion followed. No devastation. Just a ripple, too small, too quiet, for something that should have scarred the planet. On the bridge of the Dominion flagship, Overlord Karvek frowned for the first time in his undefeated career. "Fire again," he ordered, his voice calm but edged with something new, irritation, or perhaps curiosity. Across orbit, hundreds of warships unleashed synchronized devastation. Plasma lancers, gravitational shear weapons, stellar forward projectiles, enough firepower to erase a civilization in seconds. The kind of overwhelming force that had broken empires older than Earth's oceans. And yet, as the storm of destruction descended, something strange happened. Earth did not defend itself. No shield rose. No counterattack came. No desperate scramble of primitive defenses. The planet remained. Still, then every Dominion channel lit up at once. Not with interference. Not with resistance. With a single human voice. Clear. Unhurried. Almost disappointed. "Stop firing," the voice said. "You're not understanding the situation." Karvek's officers exchanged glances, some amused, others confused. This was not how Prey behaved. There was no fear in the transmission, no desperation, no bargaining, just quiet certainty. "Continue bombardment," Karvek said, dismissing it. But before the next volley could fully deploy, the voice returned. Stronger this time, overriding Dominion encryption itself, threading through systems that had never been breached in 12,000 years of conquest. "If you damage the surface," it said, "you won't be fighting us anymore." That gave Karvek pause. For the first time since entering the system, he leaned forward. "What does that mean?" one of his commanders muttered. No one answered. The second strike hit harder. One of the projectiles pierced deeper than the others, slipping past whatever invisible resistance had weakened the first wave. It struck the ocean with a focused impact, drilling down, not across the surface, but into it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the planet moved. Not an earthquake, not tectonic activity. Something deeper, vast, slow, as if the entire world had taken a breath. Across Dominion sensors, readings spiked into impossibility. Energy signatures flooded in from beneath the crust. Signals older than stars, denser than anything their instruments could classify. Karvek's tactical display flickered. Then it changed. The planet was no longer being scanned as a resource. It was being identified as a structure. "Overlord." The sensor officer whispered, his voice trembling despite years of discipline. "We are detecting internal architecture. Planet-wide. It's not natural." Karvek didn't respond. He was staring at the ocean impact zone. The water wasn't settling. It was sinking, slowly at first, then faster, spiraling inward as if something far below had begun to pull. The sea collapsed into itself, revealing darkness where there should have been depth, an absence so complete it seemed to swallow light. And then the signal came, not from Earth's surface, not from any human installation, but from beneath everything, ancient, awake, watching. Every Dominion system froze for exactly 1 second. In that second, something spoke, not in language, not in sound, but in meaning, direct, undeniable, invasive. A question, simple, curious, hungry. Who broke the seal? Karvek felt it inside his mind, pressing against thoughts that had never been touched by anything but his own will. Around him, hardened commanders staggered, some collapsing, others gripping their heads as if reality itself had shifted. The human voice returned, softer now, not to the Dominion, to whatever had just awakened. "We told you," it said, "stay asleep." Silence followed, heavy, absolute. Then the ocean began to rise again, but not naturally. It moved as if pushed from below, forced back into place by something that did not belong in any ocean. The surface smoothed, the wound closing, but the energy readings did not fade. They grew. Karvek slowly straightened. For the first time in his life, he did not issue a command. because for the first time he did not understand what he was looking at. And somewhere beneath Earth, something that had been waiting for a very long time had just realized it was no longer alone. The Dominion did not retreat. Empires like theirs did not turn away because of anomalies, no matter how unsettling. They documented them, studied them, and if necessary, crushed them. That was how they had expanded across the stars, by refusing to acknowledge fear as anything more than a temporary miscalculation. But something had changed. On every ship in orbit, systems that had never failed began returning conflicting data. Planetary scans layered over one another, each result contradicting the last. Earth appeared normal one moment, a young world with oceans, cities, and scattered technological development, and something else entirely the next, a hollow construct filled with vast, geometric voids stretching far beneath the crust. Karvek stood motionless as the data cycled. Run a full-spectrum analysis, he ordered. Strip away interference. I want the truth. We are trying, Overlord, the sensor officer replied, voice tight. But the interference isn't external. It's embedded, like the planet is rewriting how we perceive it. That owns silence. The Dominion had encountered cloaking technologies before, entire civilizations that hid behind illusion or distortion, but those were tricks layered on top of reality. This felt different. This felt foundational, as if the truth itself was being selectively concealed. Deploy ground forces, Karvek said at last. If orbit could not provide clarity, the surface would. Within minutes, dropships pierced the atmosphere, descending toward major population centers. Cities glowed below, vast, populated, functioning. There was no mass evacuation, no chaos in the streets. Humans continued their lives under the shadow of invasion with a composure that bordered on unnatural. They are not running, one officer observed quietly. They will, another replied. They always do. But they didn't. Dominion forces landed in New York, Shanghai, Nairobi, and dozens of other cities simultaneously. Armored units marched through streets that should have been filled with panic. Instead, they found civilians watching, not resisting, not surrendering, watching. Some recorded the arrivals. Others simply stood in place, their expressions unreadable. A few even met the eyes of the invading soldiers without flinching. This is wrong, a field commander transmitted. They are not behaving like a conquered species. Karvik ignored the unease creeping into his command channels. Secure infrastructure. Establish control points. Extract information. He ordered. Standard procedure. Yet even as those commands were issued, reports began to shift. There are no defensive installations, one unit reported. No hidden weapons, no fortified positions. It's as if they made no attempt to prepare. Another message followed seconds later. We are detecting subsurface anomalies, massive cavities beneath the city grid. They extend for kilometers. No, deeper, much deeper. Natural formations. Karvek asked. Negative. The geometry is too precise. That word again. Precise. Deliberate. Constructed. Karvek turned his attention back to the global feed. Everywhere Dominion forces landed, the same pattern repeated. No resistance. No panic. No attempt to fight back in any conventional sense. And always the same message. Broadcast across every frequency. Not aimed at the invaders as a threat, but as a warning. Leave the surface intact. It played in multiple languages, tones, and formats, but the meaning never changed. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a negotiation. It was instruction. Why would a species facing extinction care more about their planet than their survival? One of Karvek's advisors asked. No one had an answer. Then a new transmission came through. Priority override from a ground unit. We had detained a human officer, the voice reported, requesting interrogation clearance. Karvek allowed it immediately. The feed shifted, displaying a restrained human in military uniform. There was no visible fear in her posture, no desperation in her eyes. If anything, she looked tired. State your designation. The Dominion interrogator demanded. She didn't respond to the question. Instead, she looked directly into the camera. You shouldn't be here, she said. Her tone wasn't hostile. It wasn't defiant. It was certain. Karvek stepped closer to the display. You are in no position to dictate terms, he said. Your world has already fallen. The human tilted her head slightly, as if considering the statement. Is that what you think this is? She asked. Karvik didn't answer. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar pressing at the edges of his certainty. What is Earth? He demanded. The human held his gaze. For a moment, it seemed like she might refuse to answer. Then she exhaled softly. It's not what you came for, she said. It's what we stayed behind for. Silence filled the command deck. Explain, Karvik ordered. But the human only shook her head. You already broke something, she said quietly, and you don't even know where to look. The feed cut abruptly as alarms erupted across multiple Dominion ships at once. Not from external attack, from within their own systems. Overlord, the sensor officer shouted, panic breaking through discipline. We are receiving new signals, deep planetary origin. They're increasing in frequency. Karvik turned sharply. Translate. We can't. It's not language. It's pattern recognition, like it's trying to map us. A pause. Then, more quietly, or understand us. Across every display, the same data point appeared. The anomaly beneath Earth was no longer dormant. It was responding, and whatever had asked who broke the seal was starting to learn the answer. The first Dominion casualty did not come from a human weapon. It came from below. The outpost had been established over what scans labeled a minor subsurface void beneath what used to be a coastal industrial zone. Standard procedure dictated drilling for resources, mapping geological stability, and preparing the ground for occupation infrastructure. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, until the drill reached a depth that should not have existed. It's not bedrock, the field engineer reported, his voice echoing through the command channel. We're not hitting anything. It's just empty. How deep? The commander asked. A pause. Still going. That was impossible. Planets did not simply contain hollow spaces extending downward without limit. There were pressures, heat gradients, gravitational constraints. Physics itself rejected the idea, and yet the drill continued. Then it stopped, not because it hit something, because something touched it first. The transmission cut mid-sentence, replaced by a burst of static that no Dominion system could decode. Seconds later, every soldier in the outpost froze simultaneously, not by command, not by fear, by something else. Their senses recorded the moment precisely. A pulse, not energy, not radiation, recognition. For a fraction of a second, every Dominion mind in that facility experienced the same thing, the overwhelming certainty that something had noticed them. And then half of them were gone. No explosion, no residue, no trace of matter conversion or displacement. They simply ceased to exist. The survivors didn't even scream, because whatever had done it wasn't finished. High above, Karvik watched the replay in silence. Human attack, one of his advisors asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Negative. The sensor officer replied. No external signatures. No weapon discharge. The event originated from below the drill site. Then what? No classification. That answer hung in the air longer than it should have. The Dominion had classification for everything. They cataloged species, technologies, anomalies, even cosmic disasters. Entire divisions existed to name the unknown. But this had no category. Karvik's gaze shifted to the planetary overlay. The anomalies were spreading. Not physically, not yet, but in pattern. The deeper scans were beginning to align, revealing fragments of something vast beneath the crust. Not random cavities, not natural formations. Structures, layered, interconnected. Deliberate. Map it, Karvik ordered. We are trying, the officer said, struggling to keep pace with the incoming data. But the geometry doesn't stabilize. It changes depending on the angle of observation. Impossible. Yes, Overlord. Another silence. Then a new report came in from a different sector. We've encountered symbols, a ground unit transmitted, carved into subsurface walls. They're consistent across sites. The feed flickered, then displayed the markings. They weren't decorative. They weren't artistic. They were precise. repeating, mathematical. Translation. Kavek asked. None, came the reply. But they're not random. They follow a pattern, almost like. Like what? Like instructions. Kavek leaned closer. For what? No one answered, because something else interrupted. Across every Dominion frequency, the human broadcast changed. It was no longer repeating the same warning. Now it was adapting. You're going too deep. The voice said, calm but sharper than before. You don't understand the layers. Kavek stepped forward. What layers? He demanded, overriding the transmission. For a moment, there was no response. Then the same human voice returned, not addressing him directly, but speaking as if to someone else entirely. They've breached the outer shell, it said. Containment integrity is compromised. Containment. That word echoed through the command deck like a fracture. What are you containing? Kavek demanded. This time, the answer came, but not from the human. It came from the feed of a surviving Dominion soldier. He had been part of the drilling operation, one of the few left alive. His helmet camera activated automatically, broadcasting what he saw. At first, it was just darkness. Then the light adjusted, and the scale became clear. He wasn't standing in a cave. He was standing inside something constructed. Walls stretched upward beyond visibility, smooth and seamless, etched with the same repeating symbol seen before. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with pressure that had nothing to do with gravity. At the center of the chamber was a structure, not a machine. Not exactly. It pulsed, slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. What is that? Someone whispered on the bridge. No one answered, because the soldier took a step forward, and the heartbeat changed. It accelerated. The symbols on the walls began to glow, not brightly, but enough to shift the atmosphere, to make the space feel aware. Then the soldier spoke, not to command, not to anyone, but to it. It sees me, he said. His voice wasn't afraid. It was distant. Wrong. The feed distorted. For a moment, his reflection appeared in the polished surface of the structure. Except it wasn't his reflection. It was older, worn, as if it had lived an entire lifetime in the span of seconds. Then the signal cut. Kavek stared at the empty screen. Retrieve that location, he ordered. But even as he spoke, the sensor officer shook his head. It's gone. What do you mean, gone? The entire structure, it's no longer there. The cavity collapsed, or moved. Kavek didn't understand. Not yet. But one thing was becoming clear. Earth was not hiding weapons. It was hiding something else. Something that was waking up piece by piece. And every action the Dominion took seemed to be making it easier for whatever lay beneath to reach them. The Dominion stopped calling it an invasion. They called it an operation now. Controlled, calculated, methodical. The language shift was subtle, but it mattered. Empires did not panic. They adapted. And if Earth was hiding something beneath its surface, then it would be uncovered, understood, and ultimately controlled like everything else before it. At least, that was the plan. Cease wide-scale bombardment, Kavek ordered. Targeted excavation only. We isolate the anomaly, we study it, and we weaponize it. No one questioned him, not out loud, but hesitation lingered in every command relay, in every delayed acknowledgement. The Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds, but none of them had ever felt like this, like walking across a frozen ocean that might crack at any moment. Still, the drilling resumed. Not reckless this time. Precise. Surgical. Smaller teams deployed to carefully selected coordinates based on the growing pattern of subsurface structures. The goal was simple. Access without triggering whatever defensive mechanism had erased the first outpost. For a while, it seemed to work. New chambers were discovered. Vast, silent, ancient. Some contained nothing but the same etched symbols. Others housed inert constructs whose purpose could not be determined. There were no guardians, no automated defenses, no visible threat. Just absence. And that absence was worse than resistance. They built all of this and left it empty, one officer asked. No, another replied quietly. Not empty. Waiting. The distinction settled heavily across the command deck. Then came the first fracture. It started beneath the Pacific, near the site of the initial strike. Sensors registered a shift. Small at first, barely measurable. A pressure imbalance. A distortion in gravitational readings that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. Report, Carvec demanded. We're detecting a structural separation beneath the crust, the sensor officer said. It's widening. How deep? Unknown. It's not following geological boundaries. It's cutting across them. That was enough. Seal the site, Carvec ordered. Deploy containment fields. But before the command could be executed, the ocean's surface collapsed again. This time, it didn't stop. Water spiraled downward in a massive vortex, revealing a darkness that extended far beyond what any planetary ocean should allow. It wasn't just depth. It was absence of scale. Then the crack appeared. Not in the water. In reality, a thin line, barely visible at first, stretching across the exposed void. It shimmered, unstable, like something trying to separate from itself. Sensors struggled to lock onto it, flickering between readings that suggested both presence and non-existence. "What are we looking at?" one officer whispered. Carvec didn't answer, because something else happened. Across multiple Dominion ships, alarms triggered simultaneously, not from external threats, but from internal systems. Chronological drift warnings, temporal inconsistencies, logs rewriting themselves in real time. "Overlord," the navigation officer said, his voice strained. "We're receiving distress signals." "From where?" A pause. "From our own fleet." Carvec turned sharply. "That's not possible." "They are time-stamped from several hours ahead," the officer continued. "Same coordinates. Same engagement zone." Silence fell. "Play it," Carvec ordered. The bridge filled with overlapping transmissions. Screams. Static. Fragments of command codes breaking apart mid-sentence. And one message, repeated again and again, cutting through the chaos. "Do not open it." The signal terminated abruptly. Carvec's jaw tightened. "Future projections can be manipulated," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "This is a psychological tactic." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't, because the crack in the ocean widened, and something moved behind it. Not physically, not in a way that could be tracked, but perceptibly, like a shadow shifting just out of view. "Energy levels are spiking," the sensor officer reported, "but not in any spectrum we recognize. It's overlapping, multiple states at once." "Then isolate it." "We can't. It doesn't stay consistent long enough to define." For the first time since entering the system, Carvec felt the edge of something unfamiliar pressing into his thoughts. Not fear, not yet, but the awareness that control was slipping. And then the humans acted, not with hesitation, not with restraint, but with precision. From hidden positions across the solar system, objects that had previously registered as debris, asteroids, inactive satellites, insignificant masses, activated simultaneously. They didn't fire on the Dominion fleet. They didn't engage the invading forces at all. They focused on the crack. Beams of tightly controlled energy lanced into the distortion, not to destroy it, but to stabilize it, to contain it, to hold it shut. "Why aren't they attacking us?" one commander asked. Carvec didn't respond, because the answer was becoming clear. They weren't trying to stop the Dominion. They were trying to stop something else. "Overlord," the sensor officer said, voice barely above a whisper. "We're detecting a secondary structure beneath the moon." Carvec's eyes snapped upward. "Explain." "The moon isn't natural," the officer continued. "Its mass distribution, it's artificial, and it's adjusting its orbit." On the main display, Earth's moon shifted, just slightly, but enough to register, enough to matter. "It's part of the system," someone said. A lock, another added. Carvec stared at the display. Planet-wide structures beneath the crust. Orbital bodies acting in coordination. Energy signatures that defy classification. This wasn't a world. It was a mechanism, and they had just triggered it. Then the human voice returned. Not calm this time. Not distant. Urgent. "You've done enough damage," it said. "Pull your forces back. Now." Carvec stepped forward. "What are you hiding?" he demanded. There was no hesitation in the reply. Not hiding, the voice said. A pause. Then, quieter, containing. Before Karvek could respond, a new signal surged through every Dominion system. Stronger than before, clearer, focused. The same presence that had asked a question earlier had changed. It was no longer curious. It was aware. And this time, it didn't ask. It spoke with certainty. You are not them. Karvek felt it again, inside his mind, deeper now, pressing harder. Around him, crew members staggered, some collapsing entirely as the weight of it bore down. And beneath Earth, something ancient shifted against restraints that were beginning to fail. The crack widened, just a little more. And for the first time, something from the other side began to reach through. The Dominion finally stopped advancing. Not out of strategy, out of survival. Across the fleet, systems struggled to maintain coherence as reality itself bent unpredictably near the widening fracture beneath Earth's surface. Weapons failed mid-charge. Navigation coordinates rewrote themselves. Entire ships reported brief moments where their crews experienced hours passing, while only seconds moved outside. And still, something beneath the planet kept pushing upward. Karvek stood at the center of the chaos, no longer issuing immediate commands. For the first time in his command history, he was observing instead of controlling. Open a direct channel to the humans, he said. There was no hesitation this time. The connection formed instantly. The same voice answered. But now, there was no calm distance left in it. Only strain. You waited too long, the human said. Karvek ignored the accusation. What is it? He demanded. What is beneath your world? A pause, long enough to feel deliberate. Then the truth came, not as a threat, not as a dramatic reveal, but as something far worse. As fact, not ours, the human replied. Never was. The word settled like a fracture through everything Karvek understood. Explain. You came here thinking we were hiding power, the voice continued. Weapons, technology, something you could take. A second of silence. You were right, the human added, but not in the way you think. Karvek's grip tightened behind his back. What is it? Another pause. Then, a prisoner. The word echoed across the bridge. Not a fleet, not a defense system. A prisoner. Karvek felt something cold settle into his thoughts. You expect us to believe your entire world is built to contain a single entity. No, the human said quietly. Not built. A beat. Reproposed. The displays flickered. For the first time, the distorted scans aligned. Not completely, but enough. The structures beneath Earth, those impossible, shifting geometries, snapped into partial clarity. Not random, not decorative, not even purely defensive. They were led, redundant, reinforced from the inside out, not to keep something out, but to keep something in. Long before your empire learned to cross stars, the human continued. We found it. Not here. Not even in this system. Karvek didn't interrupt, because for the first time, he needed the answer. It was already destroying civilizations, the voice said, not conquering them, not enslaving them. A pause, ending them. Something deep beneath the surface pulsed, stronger this time, more focused. And you stopped it? Karvek asked. No, the human replied. Another pause. We slowed it down. The implication hit harder than any weapon. You brought it here. Karvek demanded. We built the only prison it couldn't break, the human said. A laid system, planetary mass, orbital locks, redundant failsafe across an entire star system. Karvek's gaze snapped to the shifting moon. The lock. You turned your own world into a cage. Yes. And stayed here. Another pause. When the answer came, it wasn't proud. It wasn't triumphant. It was simple. Someone had to. Silence spread across the Dominion command deck. For the first time, no one spoke, because the truth was settling into place. The empty defenses, the lack of resistance, the repeated warning. Humans had never been trying to protect themselves from invasion. They had been trying to protect everything else from what lay beneath them. You could have left, Karvek said slowly. You could have abandoned this system. We did, the human replied. Kavek frowned. What? Most of us did, the voice said, a long time ago. The implication twisted deeper. Then who stayed? The answer came without hesitation. The ones who understood what would happen if we didn't. Before Kavek could respond, alarm surged again, louder, sharper, urgent beyond anything before. Overlord, the sensor officer shouted, containment integrity dropping across multiple layers. The displays shifted. The crack beneath the Pacific expanded, not gradually now, but violently. The stabilizing beams from human platforms flickered under increasing pressure. Something was pushing back. Harder, smarter, and now aware. It's adapting, the officer whispered, learning the containment system. Kavek felt the presence again, stronger than before. Focus. It wasn't scanning anymore. It was recognizing. And this time, when it touched their minds, it didn't ask questions. It offered something. Images flooded through Kavek's thoughts. Endless space. Dominion fleets, stronger, larger, unstoppable. Entire galaxies bending under his command. Victory beyond anything his empire had ever imagined. And beneath it all, freedom. For it, Kavek staggered slightly, catching himself on the command console. What is it doing? One officer gasped. Communicating, another whispered. No, Kavek said, his voice low. He understood now. It's negotiating. Across the fleet, reports poured in. Some commanders were responding to the signals, not resisting, listening, accepting. They're opening channels to it, the communications officer shouted. Unauthorized transmissions. Cut them off. Kavek snapped, but it was too late. On the far edge of the battlefield, one Dominion cruiser shifted position, not toward Earth, toward the fracture. Its weapons powered down, its shields dropped, and slowly, deliberately, it began to descend. No, Kavek said under his breath. They are trying to free it, someone whispered, because they had seen the same visions, the same promise. Power beyond empires, control beyond time. All they had to do was break the cage. The human voice returned, sharper now, urgent in a way it had never been before. This is the part where you decide what kind of species you are, it said. Kavek didn't answer, because for the first time in 12,000 years of conquest, the Dominion was no longer facing an enemy. It was facing a choice. And beneath Earth, the prisoner was no longer just pushing against its cage. It was reaching out, waiting for someone to open the door. The Dominion began to fracture from within. What had once been a single, unified force, disciplined, unquestioning, absolute, now splintered into hesitation, doubt, and something far more dangerous. Belief, not in victory, in possibility. Across multiple ships, commanders who had spent lifetimes conquering star systems now stood frozen before their consoles, staring into transmissions that no longer came from their own fleet. The presence beneath Earth had found them, not as an enemy, not as a threat, but as an opportunity, and it was speaking differently to each of them. To some, it showed survival, visions of escaping a prison of flesh, of transcending the limits of time and space. To others, it offered dominion, entire galaxies reshaped under their command, civilizations kneeling without resistance. And to a few, the most dangerous few, it offered understanding, truth so vast they shattered reason. You cannot stop this, one Dominion commander whispered, his eyes unfocused as he watched something no one else could see. It's not meant to be contained. On the command deck, Kavek turned sharply. Restrain him. But before the order could be carried out, the commander straightened. Calm, certain. They lied to us, he said. Who? Kavek demanded. The humans. A pause. They are not protecting us, the commander continued. They are protecting their control. Kavek didn't respond, because for a fraction of a second, the thought almost made sense. The presence beneath Earth pulsed again. Stronger, more focused. It wasn't just reaching anymore. It was choosing. You feel it too, don't you? The commander said, turning toward Kavek with a strange clarity in his gaze. It's not hostile. It's not trying to destroy us. Another step forward. It's trying to become something more. Karvik moved without hesitation. The shot was clean. The commander collapsed before he could say another word. Silence followed. Heavy, unavoidable. Purge all unauthorized transmissions, Karvik ordered. Lock down command channels. Anyone who engages with that signal, terminate them. No one argued, but compliance came slower than it should have, because the signal wasn't something that could simply be blocked. It was already inside them. Overlord, the sensor officer said, his voice strained. It's no longer just beneath the surface. Karvik toned. What does that mean? The display shifted. The fracture beneath the Pacific expanded again, but not outward, upward. Something invisible pressed against the layers of containment, distorting space as it moved. The stabilizing beams from the human platforms flickered violently, struggling to hold alignment. It's mapping the structure, the officer continued, learning the system faster than we can track. Karvik's gaze hardened. Then the humans were right. A beat. This is not a weapon. No one corrected him, because no one could. The human channel opened again, this time without request. We're losing outer containment. The voice said, strained but controlled. If the third layer fails, it reaches the surface. Karvik stepped forward. What happens if it does? The answer came immediately. Then it won't stop at Earth. Silence. Across the Dominion fleet, that realization spread faster than any command. This thing, one officer whispered, it doesn't just destroy civilizations. No, the human voice replied. A pause. It ends continuity. The words settled with a weight no one fully understood, but all of them felt. Reality degradation is accelerating, the sensor officer added. Localized time distortion. Causality drift. It's already leaking through microfractures. Karvik's mind raced. For the first time, conquest was no longer the objective. Survival was. What do you need? He asked. There was a brief silence on the human side. Then, compliance. Karvik didn't hesitate. You have it. That alone shifted something. For the first time since the invasion began, the dynamic changed. Not enemies. Not allies. Something else. Necessary. Then listen carefully, the human said. We're activating inner system defenses. You will not understand what you see. You will not interfere. And if your forces continue attempting to breach the surface. A pause. We will eliminate them. Karvik nodded once. Understood. Orders rippled across the Dominion fleet. Weapons powered down. Ships pulled back from the planet. Not out of defeat, out of recognition. But not all of them. At the far edge of the system, a cluster of Dominion vessels broke formation. Their engines flared, not retreating, advancing, toward the fracture. They're ignoring commands, the navigation officer said. Multiple ships. They've severed communication. Karvik's expression darkened. They've chosen, he said. On the display, the rogue ships accelerated, drawn toward the expanding crack like gravity itself had shifted. They believe it, one officer whispered. They think it will make them stronger. No, Karvik said quietly. They want it to be true. Before anyone could respond, something new appeared on sensors. Not from the Dominion, not from the fracture, from deeper within the solar system. At first, it registered as atmospheric distortion around Jupiter. Then it sharpened. Shapes. Massive. Impossible. They're emerging. The sensor officer breathed. Karvik stared at the display. Entire structures, hidden within the gas giant storms, were rising into visibility. Not ships in any conventional sense. Their forms shifted as if partially existing outside normal space, their surfaces flowing with patterns that defied geometry. Human vessels, but not the ones the Dominion had seen before. These were something else. Older, stronger, and they were moving toward Earth. They've been here the whole time, someone whispered. Karvik didn't respond, because he was watching the fracture, watching the thing beneath it push harder, faster, smarter, and for the first time, he wasn't sure humanity could hold it back. The human voice returned one final time, quieter now, but carrying a weight that cut through everything. If this fails, it said, there won't be a next battle. A pause. Only an ending. And as the first of the ancient human warships slipped into position around Earth, the fracture widened again. The fracture did not widen gradually anymore. It tore. What had once been a thin distortion beneath the Pacific now split open with violent clarity, a wound in reality itself stretching across kilometers of ocean floor. The stabilizing beams from human platforms intensified, pouring impossible amounts of energy into the breach. But for every moment they held, the thing beneath adapted faster. It was no longer testing the cage. It understood it. Third containment layer has failed, the human voice reported, stripped now of any attempt at calm. We're moving to final protocols. Karvek stood at the edge of his command deck, watching a battle that had stopped resembling war entirely. Dominion ships held position at a distance, their weapons silent, their commanders no longer conquerors but witnesses. And yet even now, not all of them accepted it. The rogue faction had reached the fracture. Their ships hovered at the edge of the distortion, shields flickering under forces they could not comprehend. One by one, they began transmitting, not to the Dominion, not to the humans, but into the breach itself. They are communicating with it. The sensor officer said, his voice hollow. Karvek's gaze hardened. Destroy them. For the first time, the order carried no hesitation. Dominion weapons fired, not at Earth, but at their own. The rogue ships tried to evade, but it didn't matter. Human defense platforms joined in, their precision absolute, eliminating the defectors before they could complete whatever they had begun. But it was too late. The fracture reacted, not to the destruction, to the attempt. Something vast shifted beneath the surface. And then it pushed. The ocean above the breach exploded outward, displaced not by force, but by presence. Space folded inward, revealing not a creature, not a form, but an absence shaped like intent. It did not emerge fully, could not, but enough of it pressed through to distort everything around it. Time fractured, senses failed, reality bent, and for a single moment, every mind in orbit felt it clearly. Not a voice, not a thought, a certainty. It did not see them as enemies. It did not see them as obstacles. It saw them as irrelevant. Karvek staggered as a pressure hit, his vision splitting into overlapping timelines, moments where the fleet never existed, where it had already fallen, where the fracture had never been contained. Then it snapped back. He steadied himself. And for the first time in his life, he understood something absolute. This was not a war that could be won, only a catastrophe that could be delayed. Overlord, the navigation officer said, barely holding composure. If it breaches fully, the entire system destabilizes. Gravitational collapse, temporal cascade. We don't even have models for this. You don't need them, Karvek said quietly, because the answer was already clear. They would not survive it. None of them would. The human fleet moved. The massive warships emerging from Jupiter's storms shifted into formation around Earth, their movement precise beyond comprehension. They did not fire on the fracture. They aligned with it. They're synchronizing, the sensor officer said, matching the distortion patterns. Why? Someone asked. The answer came immediately. To rebuild the lock, Karvek said. The human voice returned, sharper now, cutting through every channel. All forces, listen carefully, it said. We are initiating full seal protocol. This will collapse every active defense layer. Once engaged, there is no recovery window. Karvek understood what that meant. You're sacrificing your entire system, he said. Yes. No hesitation, no regret. If we don't, the voice continued, there won't be anything left to protect. Silence spread across the fleet, because now the truth was undeniable. Humanity had never been hiding power for dominance. They had been holding it back for restraint. And now they were about to burn it all. What do you need from us? Karvek asked. A brief pause. Then, stay out of the way. It was not arrogance. It was necessity. Karvek nodded once. All Dominion vessels, he commanded, his voice carrying across every remaining ship. Withdraw to maximum distance. No interference. No engagement. This time, every ship obeyed, because there was nothing left to prove. The fracture pulsed again, stronger, wider, pushing against the final restraints. The thing beneath Earth was no longer contained by confusion or delay. It was pushing with purpose. with intent, with certainty that it would break free. And for the first time, it almost did. A portion of it breached through, just enough to exist in open space. The effect was immediate. One of the human warships caught in the edge of the distortion didn't explode. It unraveled, layer by layer, moment by moment, its existence peeling apart as if time itself had been rewritten around it. Karvek watched in silence. "That's what we're holding back," the human voice said quietly, not as a threat, as a statement. The remaining human ships moved faster. Positions locked. Energy surged. The moon shifted again, its orbit aligning perfectly with the fracture. Everything was in place. Almost. Final key not responding. The sensor officer said suddenly, "One of the seal nodes is offline." Karvik turned sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," the human voice replied, "colder now. We're one component short." Silence. Then realization. The missing node wasn't on Earth. It wasn't human. It was external, and it had to be replaced. Karvik stepped forward slowly. He understood, because for the first time, he knew exactly what his role in this was. The human voice didn't ask. It didn't need to. "You're going to need a replacement," Karvik said. A pause. Then, "Yes." Karvik looked at the fracture, at the thing pushing through, at the edge of reality tearing itself apart. And then he gave the order, "Prepare my flagship." The command deck went still. "Overlord," one officer whispered. Karvik didn't look at him. "Set course for the breach." Because the cage was breaking, and someone had to become the final lock. Karvik's flagship moved alone. It broke formation without escort, without defense screens raised, without any attempt to preserve itself. The remaining Dominion fleet watched in absolute silence as the largest warship in the Empire turned toward the fracture, not as a weapon, not as a conqueror, but as something else entirely, a solution. "Overlord," his navigation officer said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "We are entering a zone of complete sensor collapse. We will lose all external reference within seconds." Karvik didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the breach ahead, a distortion that no longer resembled anything that could be called space. It was not darkness. It was not light. It was absence given shape, and it was growing. "Transmit final command," Karvik said at last. Across the Dominion fleet, his voice carried one final time. "All forces will withdraw beyond system boundary. You will not return here. You will not attempt to understand this place. You will remember it." A pause. "Let this be the last world we ever tried to conquer." No one answered. They didn't need to, because for the first time in 12,000 years, the Dominion obeyed without question, not out of loyalty, but out of understanding. Karvik stepped forward as the bridge dimmed, systems failing one by one as the flagship crossed into the outer edge of the distortion field. Time lagged, motion blurred. The stars themselves seemed to stretch and bend around the ship's trajectory. "Human command," he said, opening a direct channel. It connected instantly. "You won't survive this," the human voice replied. Karvik allowed himself the smallest shift of expression. That was never the objective. A pause. "You understand what this requires?" the human asked. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. His ship would not merely block the breach. It would become part of the system, integrated, erased, reproposed into something that would never leave this place again. "Then align with the coordinate we're sending," the human said. "You will anchor the final layer." Karvik nodded once. "Do it." Coordinate streamed in. Not spatial in any traditional sense, but something deeper, alignment across multiple states of existence. His navigation systems couldn't interpret it fully, but they didn't need to. They only needed to follow. The flagship surged forward. Behind it, the human fleet completed their formation. Energy built across every vessel, not as weapons, but as structure, each ship locking into place as part of a system far older than the Dominion, far older than anything Karvik had ever imagined. The moon shifted again. Earth pulsed, and the fracture roared. The thing beneath pushed harder than ever before. It knew what was happening. It understood the attempt, and it resisted. The present struck outward, slamming into Karvik's mind with a force that shattered thought itself. You could rule everything. The vision flooded him again. Limitless power, absolute control, existence beyond decay, freedom. All you have to do is stop. For the briefest moment, the temptation existed, not as weakness, as possibility. Then it passed. Karvek straightened. "No," he said quietly, and drove forward. The flagship reached the center of the breach. Reality collapsed around it. Space folded inward as the ship aligned with the final coordinate. Systems overloaded instantly, hull integrity failing not through damage, but through transformation. The vessel began to dissolve, not into debris, but into structure, its matter rewriting itself to fit the pattern of the seal. Anchor established, the human voice confirmed, initiating full closure. Every human vessel fired at once, not into the breach, into each other. Beams connected across the formation, creating a lattice of energy that wrapped around Earth, around the fracture, around Karvek's dissolving flagship. The moon locked into position, completing the Altimus ring. The system activated, not violently, not explosively, but absolutely. The fracture resisted. For one final moment, it pushed back with everything it had. A portion of it surged outward, reaching, expanding, trying to escape before the seal could close completely. And then it stopped, not because it was destroyed, but because it was contained. Again, the breach collapsed inward, folding back into itself until there was nothing left but the ocean surface, calm and undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. The energy lattice faded. The human fleet powered down, and at the center of it all, there was no sign of Karvek's ship, only silence, long, heavy, undeniable silence. Hours passed before anyone spoke. The Dominion fleet held position at the edge of the system, waiting, watching, unsure if what they had witnessed was truly over. Then the human channel opened one final time. "This is Earth," the voice said. "Calm again. Steady. We are secure." A pause. The containment holds. Across the Dominion fleet, something shifted. Not fear, not relief. Respect. Karvek was gone, but his final act remained. The Dominion did not celebrate. They did not claim victory. They turned away. Slowly, deliberately, every remaining ship left the system, carrying with them something far more powerful than conquest. Understanding. Days later, a message spread across the stars, not as a threat, not as a declaration of dominance, but as a truth that could not be ignored. Humanity had never hidden because it was weak. It had waited because it was necessary. And when the moment came, it did not conquer. It endured. It protected. It stood between existence and something that would have erased it. And it did so without asking for anything in return. Deep beneath Earth, the prison remained, silent, sealed, but no longer unnoticed. And across the galaxy, every civilization that heard the story understood one thing with absolute clarity. Humanity was not the strongest species. It was something far more dangerous. It was the one that chose to hold the line.